The average landscape only lasts about 5 years before it has to be turned over. And I won't say it's by design, but it functions de facto like a kind of planned obsolescence, right? Is that we're going to install this landscape, in 5 to 7 years it will look like crap and we'll have to replace it with the same species that didn't look good the first time, right? And you're going to have to spend all this money on fertilizer and everything to keep the grass in this kind of stunted, unnatural state. But with productive urban landscapes, these landscapes can, if they're properly maintained, they can last decades. I mean, decades without having to be turned over. And they look better in year 5 than they looked in year 1.
Welcome to the Regenerative Real Estate Podcast, a show about human environments and how they can be used as a force for good. Conversations that educate and inspire people looking for a different way to do real estate. I'm Neil Collins, and on this episode, I'm joined by Trace Crow from Roots Down, a mission-based business out of Georgia that works with governments, nonprofits, and communities to build productive urban landscapes. I have memories from childhood running through sprinklers in the yard, and the smell of fresh cut grass still makes me think of childhood. I used to have a neighbor named Mr. Ed who had this spiky green grass that he kept meticulously trimmed like a golf course. And us kids would dare each other to lay down in it because it was so spiky. I grew up in Baton Rouge, Louisiana, a city that deeply embraced the American suburb, where the pinnacle of Southern living meant a large, lush, well-kept lawn with defined edges and tidy shrubs. But this isn't particular to the South. The lawn is part of an American fantasy, complete with a white picket fence. This is no accident either. It has been driven by a culture that has strived to keep up with the Joneses, going back to a time when only the aristocracy were able to afford not having yards dedicated to animals or vegetable production. Over time, and especially driven by a post-World War housing boom, did lawns become commonplace. Somewhere along the way, we got hoodwinked to think that our pastimes should be dedicated towards lawn care, or that we should shill over thousands of dollars each year to keep large swaths of monocultured grass alive in our yards. And this phenomenon has come at an alarming cost to both human health and to the planet. According to the EPA, each year in the US alone, homeowners use nearly 3.3 trillion, with a T, gallons of water and 1.2 billion gallons of gasoline to keep lawns looking green. This includes a staggering 80 million pounds of synthetic pesticides and 90 million pounds of herbicides that are applied to lawns. And here's some crazy statistics. Of the 30 most commonly used pesticides, 13 are carcinogenic, 21 have reproductive effects, 15 with neurotoxicity, 26 to liver and kidney damage, and 11 are known endocrine disruptors. Not only are these chemicals toxic to animals, pollinators, and pets, but according to the National Academy of Sciences, 50% of lifetime pesticide exposure occurs during the first 5 years of a child's life when they are playing in the grass on lawns and in parks. It is statistics like these that I hope will make us as a society move past thinking that the climate crisis is just a carbon problem, but also a cultural one. This is why I was so inspired to hear from our guest, Trace Crow, about the work that they are doing with Roots Down to help educate landscapers how to move beyond this extractive form of habiting the planet to create resilient, non-toxic, and beautiful landscapes. To see this kind of a program come out of Georgia gives me such hope that change can be made on a much larger scale. I'm really excited to jump into this. As I told you just before we hit the record button, I go to your website and I'm just like, man, this is whatever's going on with Roots Down. This is an interesting way into the business of change making. And like everybody, I'm very interested in the genesis that comes before company building, before getting into sustainable landscapes. So maybe we'll start there with, do you come from a long lineage of sustainable landscape managers?
No, not at all. In fact, the interesting thing is to understand the beginning of Roots Down, you kind of have to understand like my business partner, Jamie. He's the founder of the company. I joined about 2.5 years ago. And you kind of have to understand like our two journeys. Like it's almost like we were like two kind of like storms kind of approaching, and then we hit in 2020 and everything changed, right? Both of our journeys changed when that happened. I grew up in Michigan, and Michigan on the west side of the state. And Michigan has a very long history of conservation. It's well known as the automobile state, right? Which of course seems anathema to conservation. But the Michigan Department of Natural Resources, like, would regularly give presentations. Wetland preservation was cleaning up riverways. All this was like in the zeitgeist growing up in the 80s. And it was probably, I would say it was probably, the beginning of the heyday of like Earth Day, right? Captain Planet, growing up. It was kind of in the air anyway. The EPA was founded in the 70s, and it was still new and fascinating what we could do with conservation. So it was everywhere. My mom and dad did keep a garden, so I had that. But for me, the big moment was because I grew up in a very small town. I could literally bike from one end to the next, very conservation heavy, a functioning main street. The town actually invests a lot in this walkability at the town center. We have a beach, which probably sounds crazy to people who haven't visited Michigan, but we have like a beautiful beach. And so it's like my whole life was spent outside, right? So and it was spent walking around, biking around. It was very Stranger Things, honestly. It felt very much like that. And then I got to college, and all my friends were from suburbs, were from car-centric suburbs. And, I went from the west side of the state to the east side of the state around Detroit and all those suburbs. And I was like, oh, wow, like where I grew up is a very unique place, right? It isn't everyone's experience. And I really started to sense that there was something wrong, like the built environment, there's something wrong with it. And I couldn't quite put my finger on it until I took a class in college, and they had us read The Geography of Nowhere by James Howard Kunstler. And it was like, like I was able to put it into words. I was like, that's the angst I'm feeling. This is why, because we've turned America into a hellscape of strip malls, intercity highways, or intracity highways. It really helped me put a language to it. So most of my career has been thinking about sustainability from like a built environment standpoint, but I didn't really think much about the land conservation piece of it, right? Like I was like, I just want everywhere to be Paris, and not really thinking about what that means for the ecology of a place, right? And all that, and the pandemic changed everything for me. Suddenly, I'm working from home. I'm sitting on my back patio all day long because I need to get the heck out of the house, right? And I suddenly started to notice a lot of things. I started to notice how much space I had, and like that there was a lot going on, and that I don't know, it was like my world collapsed. It would collapse down to like just my 0.75 acre plot. That was my whole world for a year. And this may sound crazy. I admittedly, it sounds a little crazy to me every time I tell the story. But one night, I found out not everyone hears a voice in their head or like has a running dialogue in their head, but I do. And suddenly everything went quiet. Like it's like stopped, and it was like, make food. Inside my head, I heard it clearly, make food. And I was like, okay, I had no idea what I was supposed to do with that now, with that, but I was like, nothing like that had ever happened to me before. So the next day I just started like looking for food related, like ecology related nonprofits I could volunteer at. And Rootstown was one of them. Jamie was running a GoFundMe, trying to convert a traffic circle in his neighborhood to what we call productive urban landscapes. And I donated, $50, and he called me right back. He was the only one who responded to me. And his response was really more like, I don't really need volunteers. But I could really use marketing help. Right. And that's my background. I'd spent the last, 15 years doing marketing and branding for startups. Like that's kind of my thing. So, I mean, I started with just the website update, brand update. And then it was like after 2 or 3 months of working together, it was very clear we were on exactly the same page. And so he made me a partner, and everything changed at that point. Now, Jamie's background, I kind of need to give his background. He actually started a landscaping company when he was in his 20s, and then he got into fashion photography. That's a wild story, but that's his story to tell. And then he quit fashion photography to start a permaculture farm in North Georgia. And he realized that, like, that ain't it, right? Like smallhold farming is not a viable path forward. You can't retire on that. You're going to work for the rest of your life. The best case scenario is that your kids take it over or you sell it to a larger conglomerate, right? Like those are the options available to a small holding farmer. And he was like, oh, I get it. I need to take this knowledge into the city, and I need to, instead of trying to build community around a farm, I need to bring this farm into the communities, right? Where there's already community. And that was the genesis of Roots Down. So he kind of was thinking of it as an urban ag solution. And then when him and I collided in 2020, it became much clearer that what we needed to do is actually, rather than try and create a new class of growers or like land stewards, the landscaping industry is already there. Like there's already land stewards. They just think of themselves as janitors of the outdoors instead of land stewards. And so that's really been the genesis there, was to figure out how we could package this so that it was appealing to all the different players. And that's really where the journey started. We got an account with DeKalb County, which is the third largest county in the state of Georgia, and started the process of transitioning one of their departments to sustainable landscaping and starting to grow that portfolio of eco landscapes.
Well, let's get into that first contract, because how do you go from an idea of, I want to bring this to the city, to then getting a contract with the county?
Mm-hmm.
What needs to happen in order to realize a company from nothing to now it's not just, we're going to go convince the lady down the street that, we can take your grass and turn it into a pollinator habitat. No, we're going to go to the county.
Yeah.
And we're going to get a contract from them.
Yeah, no, totally. It was, I'll say it's, I think that all successful people require luck at some point, like require just sort of like an opportunity that presents itself that I think you're arrogant and it's hubris to assume that you made it happen. You were really just in the right place at the right time. And maybe to whatever degree you influenced it, you recognized the opportunity and took advantage of it, right? The story really is that Jamie was working with the city of Clarkston first. That was the first contract, helping them build some productive urban landscapes and trying to change over their landscaping practices. And at that time, the mayor was Ted Terry. And then Ted, in 2020, won the election to become a DeKalb County commissioner. And so one of the things he wanted to do was take what we did in Clarkston and apply it on a larger stage at the county. So in many respects, if Ted didn't win that election, who knows what would have happened, right? But the work that Jamie did in Clarkston was so successful and so empowering that Ted really wanted to take that to the county level. It took a little while. We had to shop it around to kind of see who was game to do a pilot, because nothing like this really existed, right? There wasn't a model to point to really and say, this is how we're going to do it. It was more like, we know it can be done. Give us some runway to figure out how we can do it. right?
Mm.
And so we found really fertile ground with first Commissioner Ted Terry, and then he introduced us to Commissioner Marita Davis Johnson. She had the idea because she'd already put gazebos at all 5 of the public libraries in her district. And she said, wow, what if we turn the grass around these gazebos into a garden? That would be a beautiful pilot project. And that got us introduced to facilities management, which is the department who maintains the library landscapes. The team there was absolutely loved the idea. They wanted to be change makers. And this is the one thing I'll say about, people who want to get into the change making world is that you have a lot more allies than you think you do. It's just that, especially in government, they're not rewarded or incentivized to ideate or revolutionize processes, right? It's actually, if anything, they're incentivized to just keep the status quo moving. But as soon as we presented a viable path forward, a viable alternative, we found all sorts of partners, all sorts of people very interested who'd been thinking about these types of things for years in some cases, or had tried similar pilots, right? But we found very fertile soil, pardon the pun, with the libraries and with the DeKalb County Facilities Management.
Trace, let me stop you there for a second because I'm curious. Yeah. I don't know too much about the landscaping industry of the mechanics of running that business, but I would imagine that if you are a mow and blow type of service, you're looking at your unit economics saying, how fast can I turn this one property to get onto the next property so I can do 20 in a day?
Mm-hmm.
But the county might not work that way. Do you think that was a necessary first client to be able to get away from those more unit economic type of businesses?
A little bit. Yeah. I mean, I think that the county and city governments are, one of the things that we wanted to do initially was we wanted to find out who is actually paying for the negative externalities of this industry, right? Because the industry is polluting the air, it's polluting the water, it's causing flooding issues, soil erosion, it's bad for people's health because of asthma, hearing loss. The landscaper is one of the top 10 most dangerous careers, according to the CDC, because they chop off fingers, they hurt their toes, they have back problems. There's all sorts of issues with this industry. And it's $170 billion a year. So it's not an inconsequential, it's a very consequential industry. And yet it's somehow kind of been just skipped in the ESG conversation, right? In the sustainability and the regeneration conversation. Yes, there's activists and advocates saying, let's ban leaf blowers, right? And of course, COVID sped that up. Now that we were all sitting at home, we heard how much the leaf blowers were going all day long, all week long. And it became an annoyance. But the ultimate argument is always that it's too expensive to do it a different way. And so our argument was, or our hypothesis was, well, let's find out who's paying for all the stuff that the unit economics doesn't take into account, right? Soil erosion, water runoff, herbicide and pesticide in the waterways, right? These are all things that someone is paying for, right? Now, the landscaping company may not, but someone is paying for it. And in this case, it's the county. The county ultimately, one of the things that we pointed out right off the bat was Parks and Rec, let's say, or facilities management, the way they're managing their properties, right? You may be saving money in this budget, but it's causing an increase in someone else's budget. And regardless, the umbrella of DeKalb County is paying for all of this. And in the end, the expenses, the cost far outweighs the cost savings, supposedly, from doing it in a more efficient way. There's a study out of Spain that said, that found that lack of green space can contribute to a 50% increase in schizophrenia and bipolar disorder, or is correlated. They can't say it causes, but it's correlated. And you think well, who's paying for that? What's the cost of that? Right. And so that was our hypothesis. Well, one of the interesting things is in the process of doing this with DeKalb County and kind of finalizing our product suite, how we're going to actually do this in a repeated, scalable way, is that it's actually not true. It's not even true on the unit economics side that ecological landscaping is more expensive than traditional landscaping. And there's a couple of reasons why. The average 5-person landscaping crew is going to spend approximately $25,000 a year on gasoline. These landscapes are going to use 20, 30, 40% more water to keep grass looking the way it does versus just using Dutch white clover or creeping thyme, creeping jenny, or eco fescue, any of the other ground cover options, which stay greener, don't require watering, and provide pollinator habitat, right? And food. And so you just look at that, right? A 5-person unit could switch entirely to electric equipment for less than $25,000. And then they save that money every year, right? The other problem is the way that the landscapes are maintained actually decreases the life of the landscape, right? So we have a perfect example here in Georgia. Is we got a 25-year frost, like that just, it doesn't get that cold. It got down to 15 degrees, which, anyone being from Michigan, that's laughable, right? In Michigan, it got down to negative 20, right? But that's
Atlanta shuts down.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Unfortunately, this one didn't come with any snow or ice. It just got really cold. And so all these plants started leafing, and then the cold bit them back, right? So they dropped all their leaves because they're like, whoa, this is too much for us. And what the plant needs is to be left alone so that it gets warm and it can start to leaf out again and kind of recover from this very difficult situation that it got. But the landscapers don't do that. They go in and they still try and lollipop, and they kill the plants, right? They're killing the plant when they do that. And so the average landscape only lasts about 5 years before it has to be turned over. And I won't say it's by design, but it functions de facto like a kind of planned obsolescence, right? Is that we're going to install this landscape in 5 to 7 years, it will look like crap and we'll have to replace it with the same species that didn't look good the first time, right? And you're going to have to spend all this money on fertilizer and everything to keep the grass in this kind of stunted, unnatural state. But with productive urban landscapes, these landscapes can, if they're properly maintained, they can last decades. I mean, decades without having to be turned over. And they look better in year 5 than they looked in year 1, right? So it's completely flipping the cost model, right? Right now, landscaping goes up, and then, well, I guess it'd be from your perspective, it like goes up, and then it kind of goes like this, right? And then you have to pay it again. And with ours, it's like a bump. And then the cost savings go down over time because eventually you have to use less water. Once they're established, they start to become an ecosystem that requires less fertilizer, less herbicide. You know what I mean? Like these inputs are diminished. And if they're maintained with electric equipment, there's no gasoline required. So it just, the cost savings are there. But more importantly, the problems are on the maintenance side. That's where all of the negative externalities come from. And the ironic thing is that's the easiest to change. That's just a little bit of education. That's a little bit of knowledge. It's changing the way you do things. And suddenly you're saving money and you're making landscapes more sustainable. And that I'll tell you, that's the key insight for our company, is realizing that, oh my gosh, we can have our cake and eat it too. Like we can create a lower cost landscape that looks better, feeds people, feeds the environment, and reduces or eliminates all of these negative externalities. And the same companies doing it now can do that. It doesn't have to be a new company. It can be the same company, but they just have to make the switch.
Yeah, that's amazing. There's 2 things that really stands out there. Well, 3. Like I love that you identified the infrastructure is already there in terms of the human capital that's been built up and organized already. But you touched on something earlier that rings so true, that if you talk about sustainability, there's a lot of conversation around net zero, electrification, energy efficiency, all that. Buildings, passive house. And that's an urban conversation. But then if you talk about regeneration, they go to regenerative agriculture, and you're talking like large farms. How do we sequester as much carbon as possible through grazing? And that's amazing as well. Don't get me wrong. But it's this middle path of what does urban regeneration look like? How can we combine the best of those worlds? There's a really interesting book that I might have mentioned on another podcast too, that's talking about a significant amount of biodiversity actually exists within cities. And The strange thing that I find, especially the fact that you're coming from Atlanta, Georgia, I'm also from the South. I live in the Pacific Northwest, where I think socially it's a little bit more progressive in the sense that we're not fighting the English landscaping, the English garden manicured style that is much more pronounced in the South.
Mhm.
That like
Oh yeah.
we're gonna have a lawn, it's gonna look like this, it's in the HOA. Like we don't want untidy. If that frost comes through and kills these bushes, like we're gonna remove it.
Hmm.
And that's where I find it really an interesting way to say, okay, how do we not just try to convince people to create new perennial productive landscapes, but then how do we go work with the landscaping companies that are already doing that? How do you do that? That's a different customer base
Hmm.
than I think a lot of people that have been looking at this, very passionate, heart led folks that are like,
Hmm.
we can do landscaping different. We're not going to use the gasoline. We're gonna come in and like hand clip everything. But man, what? And this is why I was really excited. I'm like, this feels different. But how do
Hmm.
you put that together, and how do you work with that kind of a customer base?
Yeah, I think one of the biggest focus points for our company was deciding that we weren't going to let great get in the way of good, right? The truth is, the landscaping industry is an absolute dumpster fire from an ecological standpoint, right? It is causing so many problems in so many different ways that if we could just make it 5% better, we're talking about a huge aggregate difference. There's 600,000 plus landscaping companies in the US. They employ 1.5 million people, right? If we just got 5% of them to switch to electric, what is the carbon footprint of that? And it's not just carbon, right? It's not just that. These landscapes will sequester, it's a net, like we're not only taking carbon, like it's not being emitted, but we're also sequestering more of it because the landscapes are allowed to grow in a way that they can start to sequester more carbon, right? One of the simplest tips is, even if you have like fescue, Bermuda's grass is just a disaster on all fronts. But if you have fescue, just let it grow longer, because the roots are going to be approximately the same. What is above ground is what's below ground. And so when you keep it short, you have very short roots, and those short roots end up, it's just roots and then clay, right? In Georgia, that's what we've got. And that creates, essentially, it's a slip and slide for water, right? It's just going to go right down. It's not going to bring any of that water. It's not going to sequester carbon. So to answer your question directly, I mean, it took us a while, but we've discovered we really have kind of like a 3-step process, right? And it depends on who we're working with. And this was really one of the key, I'll say, one of the key kind of bugaboos for us was that there are so many people with their hands in the pot. Like if you talk to landscapers, they say, well, we're just doing what the clients want, right? And if you talk to the clients, they're like, well, I'm just doing what my neighbors want. And if you talk to the county government, they're just saying, well, we're just doing what our residents want, right? And yet, when you talk to people about what their actual preferences are, most people are interested in some variation, some form of ecological landscaping, whether it's maintaining a traditional yard with all electric equipment, for instance, right? All the way to full on eco landscaping, like turning it into a nature preserve. There is a huge clientele for this, but there's now no supply. Like the problem is not demand, it's supply. No one can do it. There's less than 3% of the market are eco landscapers, but I'd argue 30 to 40% of the consumers of landscaping services would be open to some form of eco landscaping along this continuum. And so we went about creating educational tools. So really where we fit in with, we work with county government, but we also work with property management companies, HOAs, large corporations, educational institutions, anyone with a landscaping portfolio. We can help you save money and save the planet using this budget you've already set aside and just accepted was a cost center, right? We're going to take that cost center and turn it into a value center. So what we do is we start on, it's kind of like the 3 steps are like planning, pilots, training. That's the 3 steps, right? So we're going to help them understand first, what are the opportunity zones, right? For developers, it's a little different because we're helping them on the front end to put it in right the first time. But a lot of our clients are retrofits. So we'll help them understand their opportunity zones from a changing over the landscape standpoint. Then we help them with the pilots, designing them, installing them correctly, that sort of thing. And then the last piece is the training, because we have all sorts of negative case studies where like organizations spent $100,000 installing a rain garden, like this beautiful thing. And in 5 to 7 years, it looks like crap because it was maintained to death, right? In many cases, it's just been reduced to scrubby bushes and patchy grass. It's just back to what it was before. So not only did they waste their money, but then they spent all that money on maintenance and they completely undercut whatever ESG goals they had on this, right? They eliminated it. In many cases, it was actually a net negative for the landscape. And so what we show them is maintenance is the whole game. Sustainability equals maintenance. If you do not have a maintenance plan, you will ruin your sustainable landscape. That is a guarantee. You will ruin it. And so that's really where we come in. We've got 2 proprietary tools that help us with that. One is called the Grower Program, which is a 90-minute to 3-hour, depending on whether it's in person or online, foundational course that introduces traditional landscapers to the simple tips, simple things that they can start changing literally the next day to help them be more sustainable, right? Then we have what we call, it's the Roots Down app, right? Which is a continuing education thing. We drop weekly learning modules to teach them about common plants, teach them how to identify weeds versus beneficial plants, teach them ongoing tips and tricks to help them grow. Our plans are to have a level 2 and level 3 of the grower program as well that kind of boost their skills as they go along. But the truth is we don't need a bunch of horticulturists. We need the people already being paid to maintain the landscape to just be a little bit better. And that is the whole game, right? If we switch the entire industry to electric equipment, for instance, we would eliminate 50% of the negative externalities of the landscaping industry. And organizations like Cress out of Germany, we're working with them. Their electric equipment is ready for prime time. So whatever arguments they've made in the past that it's not powerful enough, the batteries don't last long enough, blah, 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 that's a moot point now. The equipment is ready for prime time. And now it's about teaching them how to make that switch, how to use that equipment properly. I mean, mulching is a classic example, right? The passed down wisdom of the industry is to what we call volcano mulching, right? Which is to mulch up the tree, up the plant, right? Well, that introduces rot. That actually can kill the tree. What you need to do is create a ring of mulch around it, which then holds the water, disperses it, and which encourages the tree or the plant to grow its roots out and deeper instead of being so surface level. That is not a major fix, right? That is a simple process fix. And that is where we're really kind of coming in. Let's make the industry a little bit better. And then once we have more entrants to the market, let's start to shift them more and more and more to the ecological landscaping lens, give them some design skills, give them that opportunity to access what is a very large emerging market that they just have no way to do it. One way to think of it is that we've got this beautiful room with 3 people in it, right? And then we've got this crowded, horrible room with 97 people in it, right? And many of the people in the big room would be gladly moved to the other room, and we just built a door for them. Basically, that's the services we provide, is to allow existing landscaping companies to access a major emerging market in their industry through knowledge, eventually through client acquisition, maybe some marketing tools. And we also we started a nonprofit, and the purpose of the nonprofit is to help with equipment grants, help with education, help with business knowledge, to help young people and new emerging brands and companies to access this new market as seamlessly as possible.
Before we get back into this episode, I want to share an exciting announcement about a very special opportunity to gather with some of the country's most innovative and pioneering professionals that are helping to grow the field of regenerative real estate. At the end of this summer, we are hosting the 2nd annual Regenerative Real Estate Gathering that will be held outside of Portland, Maine at the Riverbend Farm. This year, our theme is from ownership to stewardship. And not only will attendees get a chance to hear from incredible speakers and organizations doing work around ecological resilience, inclusive real estate development, regenerative design, and advanced sustainable practices, but it is also an opportunity to connect, unwind, and play. This is an opportunity to nurture your spirit, to get inspired, and to connect with incredible people in a unique place that comes with certified living buildings, delicious organic feasts from the farm on site, swims in the rejuvenating Saco River, and activities like yoga and dance. Last year, we were blown away by the wide array of people from developers, architects, investors, planners, realtors, and earth stewards. To find out more about this special gathering, you can find the link in our show notes or go to our website at chooselatitude.com/gathering. I hope to see you there. I've got a riff here on a couple of things. There's a lot of parallels between our work where you're talking about no supply. It's not that there's no demand, there's no supply. And we find that even within the real estate sector, that we're talking ecologically based, high performance homes. Whenever you go in to work with an appraiser around what makes this property special, I've gotten so frustrated trying to convince an appraiser that how are you going to appraise this property the same as the other one purely based on bedrooms, bathrooms, and square footage when there's so much intelligence and investment and value that you might not see? Appraisers have just kind of thrown up their hands saying, well, there's no demand for this. And if there was demand, then there'd be value for it and we would see it. And I'm over here saying that's completely not true. There's no supply.
Mm-hmm.
And if we could increase supply, and that's how we've really gone about, like, how do you consult with property owners to create truly a net positive built-in natural environment? And that's where I even think with the electric equipment that you're talking about, yeah, if you go electric, that's like going net zero with properties. But then let's take it that extra step and let's sequester carbon and add to the biodiversity of life and to the resilience of the landscape and beautify the neighborhood in the process. So I really love that. But then I also know that if one, you're doing a lot of footwork if you're releasing videos every week and giving them tips and like really transforming an industry from within, how do you ensure that you get the educational content to the people that are actually on the ground? Let's say they don't even speak English. Do you produce content that's in Spanish or
not
another
yet?
language?
We absolutely are. That's a tremendous observation there. Our goal is to ultimately introduce equity into this system, right? Is the landscaping industry is kind of notorious about contract labor. It's got an incredibly negative like turnover problem, right? I think like 3 months is the average length of time someone works for a company, and it's because they're not paid particularly well. It's especially here in Atlanta. It is 3 or 4 months out of the year. It is a hellish job to be out there in long sleeves and long pants, having like hot exhaust blowing on you all day, and you're sitting in a parking lot or you're sitting on grass, neither of which are helping the heat problem. It's a really unpleasant job that doesn't pay that well necessarily. And so ultimately we're trying to reimagine landscaping as growers, as land stewards. You're being paid to take care of the land. Let's turn you from a janitor of the outdoors into an actual knowledgeable, semi-skilled position for the outdoors, for maintaining better landscapes that are just more pleasant to be in. It also makes the job more pleasant, right? But yeah, to your point, like the first iteration of the grower program was released late last year. We've graduated the first group, which was the facilities management out of DeKalb County and their vendors. And we're currently planning on releasing not just level 2, like redoing level 1 releasing level 2 and 3, and then releasing Spanish versions as well. We're actively looking for someone who can help us access that market and really kind of be the what we call a build cert kind of specialist, right? Someone who's really going to be able to help bridge that gap between the money people, like the developers, the city, county governments, and the actual people maintaining these things. There's a huge power gap, a huge influence gap, and money gap between those two stakeholders, and we're really hoping to help bridge that. It's weird. Landscapers are really like, they're like the front lines of this kind of environmental and social issue, and yet no one seems to think about them. No one seems to be like, I wonder what it's like to be a landscaper. I wonder what it's like to have to maintain these really inhuman, unnatural environments. Maybe we could make their jobs a little bit easier, and more enjoyable. You get into landscaping because you like the outdoors, and then we force them to leaf blow hot cement in 95-degree heat, right? And so how can we start to alter that? I mean, we're really landscaper focused. That's one of the things that really kind of separate us from, well, I won't say we really even have many competitors in a direct one-to-one, but from other eco-landscaping kind of lens organizations, is that we don't have any animosity or anger or frustration with the existing landscaping industry. They were taught how to do something by chemical companies, largely, right? And gas motor companies. And now it's time for them to switch it over, just like the automobile industry is quickly switching over to electric vehicles, right? It's time. It's time to make the switch. The equipment's ready for prime time. The clients are ready for it, right? There's a demand for it. So let's help them make more money while they make the planet better. It's a really kind of a no-brainer from our perspective. And antagonism towards the recipients of this generational knowledge is really unhelpful. We really need to give them a leg up instead of being angry at them for getting a job. The type of job they could get.
Yeah, it seems, and this is just anecdotal, but with other landscape companies that are working at this level of the problem and the solution, it's almost like they've bent towards, well, who can pay for it? So we're going to go for like affluent customers that they want to upgrade their yards to perennial based systems. And I think some of them are paying for like partnering up with venture capitalist firms really early on, and like the market not being quite ready or their model not being fully baked enough for that. But this, like I said, this is just, it's a different flavor. And I'm curious if we can get into a little bit more around the business model and where you want to go with this. Mm-hmm. Because so much of landscaping is going to be real place-based of what species works well there and what is proper stewardship practices in Atlanta versus Albuquerque. What's that path that Roots Down is on right now?
That's a great question. I mean, well, I'll start by addressing what you kind of mentioned about the immediate boutique upscaling of eco-landscaping firms, right? That's simply a function of supply and demand. If you're going to get paid for 3 days of work, would you rather get 60K or 20K? Right? Like, it's a very simple thing, right? There's so much demand that the second a new entrant comes into the market, they immediately get sucked into the boutique upscale market, right? Meanwhile, there's actually still a gigantic market for really traditional landscaping services just done in a different way, right? Mm-hmm. And very few organizations are even focused on that, let alone trying to service that market, right? And because of the ideological quality of eco-landscaping, where it came from, permaculture, it kind of came from this, you need horticulture knowledge, you need to understand ecology. It kind of came from this, kind of, I don't know. I guess it came into the market with a chip on its shoulder. And so there is a lot of antagonism between the eco-landscaping market and the traditional landscaping market. And they kind of feel like they're enemies, right? And who's losing in that, right? In the end, the consumer is losing in that. They're the ones losing because one side thinks that they can only service wealthy people and the other side thinks that that's some sort of commie plot, right? And it's like, it's neither of those things. There's a market for this. If you want to make more money, start doing it this way and you'll make more money, right? You'll lower your costs, possibly raise your prices, which means your profit margin grows, right? Our whole argument when we talk to traditional landscaping companies is just give us a shot, right? Like, we'll make it as easy as possible for you to start a all electric unit and just give it a shot for a year and see which unit is the most profitable, after a year. I think you'll find the eco landscaping unit is more profitable because customers will pay more for it and also your costs will be lower, right? So our business model, we found that there's a lot of stakeholders, right? That was the biggest thing for us initially, was trying to get our heads around trying to change an industry with a lot of stakeholders, and everyone has competing interests, right? So a lot of it has been trying to figure out, like, how do we provide a unified product or suite of products that gets to the heart of the problem and also makes everyone in the system happy, right? And so what we've really landed on is, let's start with the large landscape portfolio organizations, right? So colleges, large corporations, property management firms, city and county governments, HOAs to a certain degree, organizations that have a responsibility for a landscaping budget, because we're going to be able to show them cost savings and we're going to be able to support their ESG goals, right? I think it was projected, in the next decade, we're going to spend $8.4 trillion on ESG investment, right? This is on everyone's mind. And they're all overlooking the landscape as an opportunity, right? Like, you have an opportunity to have a great story about your sustainability goals while also lowering your costs. It's kind of a no-brainer for those who are managing large landscaping portfolios, right? But in that process, we've built into it the training and the support that their landscaping partners need to be able to service this client, right? But then what can they do? Those skills are perfectly transferable to their whole client portfolio, right? And the reason why we did that, the reason why we've gone about it this way, is that if we change a resident, a single family homeowner, they don't have any leverage over their landscaper. In fact, this happens regularly where someone will switch over their landscape, request that the landscaper they have does something different. And the landscaper says, deuces, right? I'm out. Why would I do that? You're one of 150 clients I have. I'm not changing anything for you, right? The difference is, if you're the landscaper for a Fortune 100 company, you'll make the change. You'll do what they tell you to do. But on top of that, that Fortune 100 company is going to pay you to make that change. That's part of the product that we offer. And so we're really offering it as a carrot, not a stick. We're going to show you how to upgrade your services, and then you can take that to your other clients, right? It's not like we're just showing you how to take care of this company's portfolio. We're showing you how to take care of all of your clients in this way. And this gives you a whole new product to go to all your clients and sell, right?
And
switch
do you help
over.
them with the marketing as well?
Right now we're not, because we're really too small and too locally oriented. But yeah, that's kind of the whole purpose of the Roots Down app, is to get to this point where we can start to allow them to access clients. What we're finding is the ecological education that we're offering to landscapers is actually attractive to a whole range of people, even outside of the landscaping industry. All the DIYers, right? There's this huge market for knowledge about ecological landscaping that it goes beyond professional landscapers. And so we see an opportunity to start to bridge that gap, right? Help clients reach the landscapers. Yeah, and for select few, we are starting to take a little more direct hand in helping to guide their operations so that they can start to be good case studies for what we're talking about. And we can start to hone that business knowledge model, right? That we can help offer them, things that are on the table are like templates for flyers, right? Like, just here's the template, plug your information in, get it printed off as a trifold and give it to all your existing clients. And now you have an ecological landscaping service offering that you didn't have before, because you have the knowledge and you have the equipment to be able to do it now.
So right now you're just in Georgia. And where are you in Georgia?
Yeah,
are you in different locations?
We're just in Atlanta Metro. Really, it's like the 15 county region of the Atlanta Metro area. is really where we're operating. But we have national ambitions. Like this is not a local thing. It's not a regional thing. The only difference between doing what we're doing here and doing it in Arizona is a different plant palette, right? Different soil requirements. The ecology is different. But in the end, the truth is that the landscapes in Arizona are being maintained exactly the same as the landscapes in Georgia. And that's part of the problem, right? So we'll start to have more regionally focused grower program content. For a little bit of inside baseball kind of thing, we're probably considering sort of a franchise model for expansion, really kind of allowing the design build firms within the landscaping industry, because every major market has at least one ecological design build firm, right? Every major market does. So is this an offering that we could give to them that they can license, and then they can help spread that? And then they've got this backbone of the Roots Down app and the grower program, which we can put in their community colleges or technical schools, right? So that we provide the educational backbone while they can then expand their business through their clientele. We think of ourselves as an irrigation system, right? Our goal is to take resources or receive resources from the larger organizations and then try and sprinkle them down to the local organizations that are really doing the work. We think of ourselves as more of a connector, catalyzer, broker, if you will, more than an organization that has a desire to grow and clamp down on a market and this is our market. It's more like we're a meme and we want to spread the meme and enable people to be able to really latch onto it and integrate into their business so they can make more money. We'll make more money as well. But most of we really wrestle for a long time about whether we should be a for-profit or a nonprofit. Ultimately we decided that for-profit would enable us to be a little more dynamic and fluid in the way that we expanded and attacked the problem. And also, opens us up to investment from larger firms so that we can, take advantage of the capital flows that want to go into sustainability. This creates a market mechanism for them to be able to drive sustainability while also making money,
Yeah.
right? Like if you can use capitalism to make a difference, that's probably the way in our current system you should go about it.
Where are you at on that cycle? Are you bootstrapping this? Are you investor backed?
We have an angel investor. We actually have a couple of angel investors. We are looking to go bigger with that side of it. So far, we've been mostly bootstrapped. We've been mostly operating. The small investment we got is about a tenth of what it's taken to do R&D over the last 2.5 years. Everything else has come from either a couple of loans or client revenue. I'll tell you that, in hindsight, I would never choose to run a government consulting firm and bootstrap it, right? That it has created a lot of cash flow issues, a lot of sleepless nights, but it's required us to be very focused, right? So there's very little waste in our organization. We've been very focused on the mission and trying to find the best possible combination of products and services that would allow a rapid switch, because we only got 10 years, right? If we're really being honest here, right? This landscaping industry cannot continue the way it is. It needs to change rapidly. So how can we do that using market mechanisms versus banning leaf blowers, right? That's not going to solve the problem. You need to make leaf blowers obsolete, right?
Mm-hmm.
So how do you do that rapidly? And you change the landscapes, change the way that the practices are done, and you can get there a lot faster than banning everything.
Let's say you want to work with a college. They have a large campus. They're serviced by an outside contractor, a landscaping firm. Who ultimately pays for Roots Down service?
The university would.
The university.
So, because ultimately the university are the ones who are going to receive the cost savings down the road, right? So the cost of upgrading their landscapers, right, is very minimal compared to their overall cost, right? I threw out the statistic earlier, right? To change over a 5-person team to all electric and receive all the training is less than a year's worth of gasoline for the equipment they're currently using. So the cost savings are there. When it comes to third party stuff, it can be a little bit interesting, right? A lot of universities, a lot of the large organizations like that actually are in house. So that argument is even easier to make because they're the ones buying the gasoline. They're the ones paying for all of these inputs. And so we're just like, what if you didn't have to pay for them anymore? What's that worth to you? But even when it is third party, right? The benefit, the story benefits, the ESG benefits, right? That whole storyline, it's really just a dynamic way of doing it because the cost, comparatively speaking, right, to pay for your landscaper vendors to go through this stuff is cheaper than outfitting a single building with solar panels. And the benefit to the environment could be roughly the same. You also have this story of helping a small business upgrade their business. There's all these benefits and stories that come from it, as well as actual tangible benefits for the university. I think many people get like a surprising amount of reverse sticker shock when they see how inexpensive this actually is. For instance, like we converted landscaping around 7 DeKalb County libraries for approximately $2 a square foot. I mean, we're not talking a lot of money here, really, in the grand scheme of things, right? If you're spending, for instance, I think the county spends, several $1,000,000 on landscaping services every year, right? Maintaining their hundreds of properties. And we're talking about a drop in the bucket, right? We're talking about a very small investment that can kind of spiral and become a much bigger cost savings down the road.
Oh, man. Yeah, that's really interesting. It brings me to my next question around, you mentioned property managers. I've got a property management background. We had a company that, you're doing scattered site management of rentals. I can see the argument that you can effectively make to say, look, how do you attract residents that want to be there? They will pay good money to be in a property that reflects how their values. Hopefully they will stay longer as well with properties that become home. But how do you make that argument to a property management company where they are contracting with a landscaping company that also services a lot of different clients and property management companies? Like, where does the money come from if you're coming at it from property management company or an HOA where it's not a university with a several $1,000,000 landscaping budget?
Yeah, I mean, one of the first arguments is they're still paying for the water. They're still paying for those landscaping services in the end. And they're also paying for resident turnover. These are all things that cost them money and they know what it's costing them, right? Like they know what an extra year from a resident means for them, for instance, right? And, there's a couple of like key statistics here is that the Realtor Association of America in their most recent like state of the industry highlighted that on average, slight complexity in the landscape leads to 100%, up to 70 to 100% ROI on the investment in that landscape. And that applies to apartment dwellers as well. That applies to condo dwellers, anyone who's renting, is that people will stay longer. Millennials overwhelmingly want gardens. They want fruit trees. They want blueberry bushes. Now, they want lawns too. And the curious thing about that, right, is that the landscaping industry says, see, millennials like lawns as much as boomers do, right? And that's not really true. They like a flat green space they can put a picnic blanket out on, right? They don't care if it's clover or Bermuda grass. Like they don't really care what it is. They just want that space for their dogs, for their kids, for their picnic blanket. And that is a key difference, right? Because in the end, what they really do want is some green space surrounded by a beautiful, lush landscape with biodiversity. And we're the generation that's coming up that is driving the real estate market, including the rental market. I mean, a lot of the rental market, right? And so really the key benefits there are going to be residents will stay longer. They'll be more engaged in the community as a community. It provides a space and an opportunity for programming if that's something that the property management company wants to do. It will save them in water. I can't say that in year one it's going to save them enough water to justify the cost of switching over, but it will over time. And also, their landscapes will last longer. So they won't have to replace that landscape. What's the cost to them to replace their landscape every 5 to 7 years versus every 20 to 25 years? And so those are our arguments, and also, if you apply these practices across a large landscape portfolio, those water savings alone might actually justify the cost of doing it. Right. So, yeah.
Are you looking at the market where more and more communities or developments are bringing in foodscaping as a part
Mm-hmm.
of the amenities to attract tenants? So putting in a community garden, is that
Mm-hmm.
is that also in the purview of what Roots Down is aiming for?
In some respects, I'll say that we're a little bit of a counterpoint to that. The community garden movement and the urban ag movement as a whole has proven to be a much stickier than it came across at first, right? We really don't subscribe to volunteer-based maintenance schemes. Like, they're paying someone to maintain these spaces. So yes, raised beds are beautiful, right? Especially for ADA compliance, right? People in wheelchairs, older people who can't stoop over, right? Like, it's good to have raised beds, but requiring tenants to maintain those spaces, it will inevitably lead to rotting wood boxes full of dirt and weeds. It will. That again, it's like if you build a big long field of grass, I guarantee you will have flooding issues. I guarantee it, right? If you build a bunch of raised beds, within 5 to 7 years, I guarantee you that program will fall apart because it's susceptible to burnout, to the resident who is the one leading it leaves, right? It becomes very difficult and unwieldy to maintain that enthusiasm over time. And you're already paying someone to maintain the landscape around it. So just teach them how to maintain the beds too, and you got it covered, right? So that's really our lens is very much like, no, we need to professionalize productive urban landscapes. So we need to integrate them into the landscapes in a landscaped fashion so that people recognize it as landscaping. And we need to teach the people that are already responsible for it how to do it in the correct way so that they maintain those areas. Blueberries are a tremendous replacement for something like a Nandina or a boxwood. It looks similar, it fills the space in much the same way, and they're dead easy to take care of. Like, forget tomatoes and peppers. If you want something that even the brownest of thumbs can maintain, blueberry. Just plant a blueberry, properly water it in a few years, 4 to 5 years, you'll have gallons of blueberries coming from those things. And so that's kind of the argument that we're making, is that professionals are already maintaining it. And frankly, professionals usually are the ones who destroy the community gardens by not recognizing what's a weed and what's not, right? They'll go and whack down the kale thinking it's a wild lettuce or something. And so, as I said earlier, the programming component, no, it's absolutely imperative and a great way to cement it by including the community and including their input and allowing them to participate in it. But you should not be relying on them to do free labor for you. This is you're responsible for landscape. You're paying someone to do it. They should be the one responsible for maintaining it.
But Trace, you've got a fan in me. I'm just fascinated with what you and Jamie are doing with Roots Down. I can't wait to follow the journey and to see where you're going to take it. It seems like it's got a lot of legs with it. I love that you're doing it in Atlanta. I've been tuning in to what's going on in that market for a short time now, but I got to say, I'm like blown away at some of the things that the county are doing and the developers and the businesses. So that's just amazing to see that coming out of the Southeast region. Where can people find out more about Roots Down, get a hold of the app? Where do you want to send people as a call to action with this podcast?
Yeah. The best thing would be to follow us on Instagram. That's really where we play most often. And we're Roots Down GA on Instagram. That's also our website, so rootsdownga.com. Those are probably the two best places to go. I'm not sure that, if you're not a landscaper a professional landscaper, I'm not sure how much value you'd get out of the Roots Down app at this point. But it is available in the App Store and Google Play if you want to download it. It's totally free, and there are over 100 articles about different landscaping concepts that you could read at this point. The learning modules will be dropping weekly starting next week, and we'll start dropping them regularly about different concepts. So you can get that there. But I would say just follow us on Instagram, go to the website, maybe sign up for our newsletter, and you'll start learning something.
If you want to follow our work at Latitude, you can follow us on Instagram at latitude.regenerative.re, and mine is at I am Neil Collins. We inherently believe in the potential that comes from connecting value-aligned and purpose-driven people together in community. That's why I encourage you to join our mighty network and introduce yourself to the other people working across the globe to advance a more regenerative, resilient, and beautiful world. Here, we want to know what you're working on and what inspires you. Through this platform, you can attend live events, take courses provided by our podcast guests, and create connection with other people and businesses that share your same passion. To join, find the link in our show notes or visit our website at chooselatitude.com. If you'd like to support the show, please share it with your friends and be sure to follow us on your podcast app so that you always have the latest episode downloaded. Another way to support our regenerative field building is to leave us a rating and review on Apple Podcasts. Positive ratings help attract amazing guests, and they can be the deciding factor for someone else to tune in and listen. And who knows? Maybe this is the kind of motivation that it takes for them to finally decide to align their profession with their sustainable and regenerative values and become a positive force for good within their own community. This show was produced by myself and edited by Anthony Wallace and offered as a part of our work with Latitude Regenerative Real Estate.